Here are the two main issues that Democrats have been using for the last, let's call it, 2 years. Trump bad and COVID. And apparently now the public is done with COVID, where
we don't dumb anymore.
It's just not like an issue anyone wants to hear about.
Yep.
And Trump bad, in my opinion, is like a much, much weaker argument. So there's a fundamental narrative that someone walked me through that I tend to agree with. This is one of the premises of my presidential campaign, actually, was that people are getting more and more fed up and they're casting about for some kind of answer to the fact that stuff's not working and government's not really delivering. And this has energy on the left and the right and all over the place. And so you could use this as certainly an emblem as to why Bernie was very successful. And then, of course, the corporate media and everyone tried to sandbag him. It's a reason why Trump was so successful, that people are fed up and will elect a person who's just like, I'm just going to, blow it up and break things. This person made an argument that it was one reason why Obama was successful against Hillary as like a change agent. And so people have been casting about for this alternative and being, frankly, fed up and disappointed. And getting,
he had no experience. I like Obama a lot.
And getting angrier and angrier all the time because like it's not delivering. And there's like this system that is built up to try and keep anything from changing, where the people are trying to change it and not being able to do so. And so now like democracy itself is kind of disintegrating. We are back on the podcast, and we are going to be talking about Election Day results. We're recording this on Election Day itself, so some of the results are unclear. But the race that everyone is looking at is Virginia's governor race, and it's right now too close to call. I'm told that it might actually take a minute to count these votes because it's going to be tight. But just the fact that it's tight actually is an enormous story in itself, because this is a state that Joe Biden won by 10 points. It has gone from purple to just about blue. and so the fact that we think there's a good chance that Virginia gets a Republican governor in the next number of hours or days is a huge deal.
Or it's gone from blue to just about red? Because it was 10 points blue, right? So I guess it was a blue state? I don't know. This is fascinating.
Yeah, 10's a lot.
10's a lot.
But this race is being hailed as the future of American politics because it's a pretty good litmus test. Virginia is, you could use it as a microcosm of the country. It's got some rural areas, got some urban areas. A lot of people who are essentially commuters to D.C. live there. So there's like this whole wealthy set of suburbs that is maybe like the most hotly contested battleground. You have a Republican candidate who's, I'm going to call him, this is what came to mind for me. Okay. I don't know if this is right. I'm going to call him a Mitt Romney Republican.
I think that's right. Glenn Youngkin, the challenger here.
Yeah, he's a tall private equity guy, wears fleece vests, kind of sells himself as like a relatively normal dude.
Former CEO, private equity guy like Mitt is a former CEO of the Carlyle Group.
Yes. So he's much more Mitt than Trump. That is for sure. And then he is squaring off against the once governor, Terry McAuliffe, who's a Democratic institution. And you can see that with the panoply of Democratic luminaries who came and campaigned for him. Everyone came.
They all came.
Obama, Biden, Kamala. Anyone who could draw a crowd in the Democratic Party showed up.
There?
Kamala
that
was
makes
there.
Sense.
Yeah, sure. It's a pretty quick commute for them, too, from the White House.
That's true. It's an easy.
To get to Virginia. But Terry McAuliffe is a big effing deal in the Democratic circles. I chaired a CNN set with him multiple times.
Oh, so you know him. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I'm friendly with Terry.
Oh, cool.
And he has everyone's number in his phone. Right. He's an institution. He was the governor already. Now, Virginia has a rule where you can't do it again until you take a break. It's kind of sort of interesting. So he was governor until 2018, and then he did something else, and now he's like, and I'm back to be governor again. But the people of Virginia are not exactly jumping up and down for joy, apparently, that Terry's back, at least, maybe not 51% of them. And so there are a few things that we should dig into here that do augur for the future in America. And number one is that Democratic enthusiasm is kind of on the lower side compared to Republican enthusiasm.
I'm going to make an argument that they're not thrilled about Terry 2.0. And you could argue, like, he had a pretty seamless and well-favored first term, let's call it. If you call it, I guess it's the first term, right? 2014, 2018. He was well-liked. They thought he'd be a shoo-in in a plus 10 Democratic state. And that is not the case. So maybe you talk more about what Terry stands for, and then I could give a rundown of where Glenn's at. What are you thinking?
One of the interesting lenses that people have taken to this Virginia race is that, in part, maybe because it's so close to D.C., that Democrats' inability to pass the infrastructure bill really is hurting Terry.
He's dropped since
because what the argument is that if Democrats can demonstrate that they deliver, then that's a better case for Terry. And if they can't seem to deliver, then it's a weaker case for Terry.
Right.
I thought this was an interesting argument, but there were a lot of people making it, and Terry went on record saying, "Please pass something."
Yeah, he bashed him. Yeah,
he was like, "Hey, like let's show the people what we can do." That has not been delivered prior to Election Day, so they're saying that could depress turnout. On the other side, the Republican wedge issue that has energized their base is schools and critical race theory being taught in schools. Terry McAuliffe had a quote saying that it should be not up to parents what's being taught in schools. It should be up to teachers and administrators. And that quote did not fly well. I actually talked to Evelyn about this, where I was like, hey, if a politician were to say that it's not up to parents what's taught in schools, it's up to teachers and administrators, like, how do you react to that? And you know, there is some nuance, like some things you probably do want, you know, just for schools to decide, you know, things that are, let's say, fact-based. I mean, you don't want them teaching like different forms of, I don't know, biology or something. But this certainly falls into like a zone where I think parents would feel like, okay, like I should have a say in what's going on in my kid's school when it's around something like race. And so this quote has really hurt Terry McAuliffe, and they're saying that if he loses, this would be his like deplorables quote.
They look. I think the rational middle here is you want to empower great teachers and great administrators to create a great positive learning environment for kids. But at the end of the day, they work for the public. Public school teachers work for the public, same way that firefighters and police officers do too.
And certainly, if you're a parent, you don't want to hear that it's not up to you.
Yeah, this is stuff that's taken out of context.
That's a bad quote. So there's a bit of a boogeyman effect where it's like, you know, are you sure that these schools are actually teaching critical race theory in the way that it's being described? A lot of them apparently are not.
Right.
But it's an issue that is animating voters, and Republicans are seizing on it. And I will say, if Glenn Youngkin prevails, they're going to seize on this all over the country, because if they can make this case successfully in Virginia, they're going to try and make it everywhere.
This race is fascinating because like a microcosm for, well, one, it's a national race now, but it's a microcosm for the future of both the Democrats and the Republicans in a certain way. So Glenn Youngkin, the Republican, is running as what I call like you call him Mitt Romney. It's like your rich guy conservative, right? And he's done objectively a really good job navigating, let's call it the pro-Trump side of things, and also appealing to moderate Democrats who are coming over and independents and moderate Republicans in a bunch of ways. So he's relatively moderate. He says he doesn't support abortion, but frankly, he's not the type of guy to do anything to mess with it. He's against a Texas law. That's not a priority for him. Like, he navigates the social issues, social conservative side of the Republican Party. He's pro-guns, like pro-Second Amendment, but the NRA has not endorsed him. Like, it's that kind of moderate situation. And the point is, and that's what I want to talk about, is in races like this, or in any race, the why matters most, in my opinion. Like, why are you running? And he is running, his why right now is, I'm a concerned former businessman that's concerned with how our kids are being educated. And one of his slogans has been "Parents Matter." So he's frankly navigating these culture wars, critical race theory, which we can dive into, but also education of our kids. And that's his why. Where he's like, this is stuff that hits parents every day, and I want to be a governor that supports parents and not overreach of government educators and the like. And I don't know what Terry's why is on the other side. Like, why is he running? Is it, and that seems to be from listening to Biden's stump and Obama's stump, is that it's still Trump bad?
It's still Trump bad.
Right. And that's
so,
hard.
So this is one of the tough things for Democrats, is that their strongest argument right now is defeat Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And Trump's not on the ballot. They're having a hard time lashing Glenn Youngkin to Trump because they seem like different humans, but they keep trying. And so if you're making a negative argument, essentially it's like, help us defeat Trump, we're not Trump, then people do start to ask, okay, like, what are you for? And Democrats are having a hard time delivering. And so that's a less compelling argument. But I want to say that Terry is in some ways really an emblem for this. Is like, Terry is not generating a lot of excitement natively. And so they're trying to bring in the star power. And so this is like the new Democratic playbook. It's like, hey, you might not get excited about anything I'm talking about in terms of a real life agenda I can deliver for you. You might not be that excited about the candidate, but we're going to bring in some people that might excite you, and you have to help us keep defeating Donald Trump. I mean, that's like really a tough place to be. There's something very much missing from the Democratic solution set or energy or playbook, because this case is just getting weaker and weaker. I said something to myself. I guess I didn't really say that much, but it's like Democrats had an easier case when you can blame everything on the crazy person. It's like, hey, like let's get him out and then everything will be better. But the problem now is that he's out and people are still sad and angry and looking around being like, okay, you guys are in charge. What's happening? They haven't been able to deliver on any major promises, in terms of like some of the big ones that right. they ran on. And that's one of the dangers of this polarization, is that you end up saying, look, that person's bad, we're, good, let's say, and then we're going to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And then you get in there and then you can't deliver those things. And then everyone's like, well, then why did you gin us up like this? Why did you get us all motivated? And they'll be like, oh, but we need you to vote again right now. And then people are like, I'm not really sure I'm feeling that. I mean, there was a story that came out about them trying to sign up black voters in Georgia and saying that they're having a really hard time because the voters are like, well, I did this last time, or, my friends did this last time. And what did we get? And what they were waiting for is, something around either voting rights or police reform or criminal justice, and they haven't seen it. And so then they get less motivated. All right. One thing you can do that's going to make you feel better about yourself is treat your body right. There are different ways to do that. You can sleep, you can exercise, and you can eat better. You can ingest actual nutrients. And if you are like me, you want to do the right thing, but it's not always easy to track down that kale, that salad, that thing you should eat. So you know how you can actually solve this problem and make yourself healthier on the regular? Athletic Greens. You just take one scoop, you combine it with water, and it contains 75 vitamins, minerals. When you drink it, you are doing something good for your body. You know what I mean? When you take something and it's like, okay, I just did something really, really good for myself. That is Athletic Greens. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you an immune-supporting free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase if you visit athleticgreens.com/yang today. Again, simply visit athleticgreens.com/yang to take control of your health and give AG1 a try. You will be glad you did. AG1 will make you feel like you are treating your body right, and it is so easy. Just take that mix, you put it in water, you drink it, and you just are supercharged for the day.
You'd say when you went to the Midwest and you talked about being a Democrat, like the Democrats can win back voters in the Midwest if they do things that actually impact people's lives. And one of the things that's interesting to me is on local races, people know what life is like. Like the governor does have executive authority to do a lot of things that touch your daily life in a state, in many states. Mayors as well, these executive functions. So if the Democrats are running on these national issues like climate change and defund the police, or it should be a local issue in many ways, but or Medicare for all, or Trump bad, right? That doesn't necessarily touch your life specifically, right?
As much as like the curricula that your school,
right?
your
And
kid's school
Parents
is.
Matter hits your life, right? And there are critical race theory. There's a lot of like it's now a catch-all term that means too many things to different people. So people saying strong opinions on it, they probably can both be right in many ways and how it's defined or not defined. But I mean, seeing, even if they're one-off small boogeyman cases, but you're seeing kids being told that their skin color is something that makes them evil or less of a human or whatever it is, that's something that hits parents real hard, and the government can affect.
I had
Governor
some
can
very, very middle of the road friends who are upset that their white daughter came home and essentially asked, like, why can't I be friends with my black classmates?
And how old is the daughter?
8, maybe. Yeah. Because they're being taught essentially that that they are not the same, that they have this apparently like real power differential where the 8-year-old white girl has been made to understand that she needs to be much more conscious and cognizant about the black girl situation, and it's made them both self-conscious. By the way, she was actually already friends with this black girl before some of these lessons came down the pike, and then it seems like their friendship now is supposed to be different or conscious of this element. So she came home and asked her parents, like, why can't I be friends with my friend anymore? And her parents obviously were horrified and angry, being like, of course you can be friends with the classmate you've already been friends with. And so then they went to the administration being like, what the heck is going on in the school? And they got a response that was pretty much like, no, this is the way it's going down. And so, there are parents that, that I know that have had this experience in real life, some version of it. So is that happening in schools in Virginia to the extent that it would move voters? I don't know. Some of it definitely is just boogeyman creation, where the rest of it.
Yeah.
But I can say that it's happened in real life in my own network. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that something like that's happening in households in Virginia.
Terry was pressed by a black reporter on the local TV station to define. He talked about how critical race theory is not a problem, and the woman said, "Well, can you define it?" And he refused to define it, and that's one of the biggest challenges you have, where the actual academic of critical race theory, where it came from, was an academic term used in postgraduate studies, frankly, in law schools, to basically be more critical about social outcomes and a number of outcomes through the lens of race, which I think to the average person, like, that makes sense, right? Like, race is a factor. To be then dumbing down versions of that for young children, there's more of a debate there. And I think how people define CRT, and Carly and I did an episode on this, it depends where you're coming from and how you want to define it. But parents are emotional about their kids, right? And they see this stuff, they see one, they freak out, they're going to their school board, and you can what they're talking about in terms of teaching this is actually transcending racial lines. It is not just the white parents getting upset about that. That may be the majority, but there are plenty
of black parents who also
and of all races.
Very, very problematic. One of the major issues here is that people are defining in different ways. It's just become a political punching bag. Right. But I will say this issue is a loser for Democrats.
Yes.
Like it's
they don't have the right side of this.
Yeah. And so that is one piece of advice I'd have, is that Democrats, you might want to try and define this in a way that you can either full-throatedly say, hey, I'm for it and this is what it is, or say, look, there are elements of this that we agree are not something that we want to necessarily fight for at the polls. But right now, this is just something that's just going to be used by Republicans in a way that, frankly, like, stands up to the point of view of more families, more parents, more Americans than the opposite.
And when you get, so the big thing is that and this is where I'm curious about your thoughts on, like, institutional trust and our trust in the media. Like, a lot of the press on this race, which actually specifically national press, is saying that Youngkin is dog whistling to the right, to the racist, pro-Trumpers. There's another one that said, I'm going to read this headline. It was in The Guardian. That was Youngkin's success is based on, the term was white backlash, which is based on either CRT or various, let's call it racial, cultural lines or boogeyman, whatever you want to call it. And I think some of that is probably true in the sense that he is he's intelligently trying to not piss off the far right of the party, so they'll turn out and vote for him. But I also think, to simplify it that way, just on racial lines, and this is a right.
Well, that's one of the favorite things about the media is the media wants to racialize everything. The media just wants to treat everything and also they want to take any behaviors of a certain type and then categorize them as capital R racist. And that's true for certainly most anyone with an R next to their name in the form of Republican. So this is one thing that we touched on last week, is just the media has certain narratives they just want to beat like a drum all the time. And race is one of the main ones because it animates reader emotions on one side or the other.
Yeah.
It gets you to read it. And so as long as that's the dynamic, I mean, there was an article that came out where it talked just about things that will tap into your emotions as being the best for increasing digital subscribers, which makes sense for a lot of these media organizations. And race was toward the top of the list.
I'm sure. It's a tribalism. I will say this, like, there's some truth to it, right? Which is there is like one of their last ads. So one of the hot button issues has been the book, Toni Morrison's Beloved, in high school. I think it's high school AP English. It was unclear on what they're actually talking about in terms of the age. But it's a book that has a lot of graphic sexual violence and I think bestiality. It's like a very, very, but it's obviously beautifully written, but dark reality of slavery in that era and that story. But the ad they run is it's a white woman in a like crew neck sweater with the gold cross on, talking about how she's scared of, I don't think she even mentions the word beloved, but like the types of material being taught in schools. And there's like panning shots of her like all white super waspy family over the fireplace. It's like the catering to that strong demo.
So that was a Democratic ad?
That was a Republican ad talking about how basically there's a bill that would require parental approval for these types of books or like a disclaimer when these types of books or materials being taught in schools. And Terry vetoed this bill, I think twice. So she's talking about this impact on her son. And it's emotional, it's like a little jarring, but it's also, it's hitting a certain demo, right? Pretty hard. There is, I'm not saying, what's right or wrong, it's a war, if you will, but it is a tactic, right? I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but that's a real ad. It was one of the big hot button issues down the stretch.
Yeah, it's an appeal to a certain type of voter. I'm sure they have numbers showing that it's effective. I happen to think that reading those kinds of books is generally a good thing. I'm trying to think about the books that I read.
I think it's fair to say, like, hey, this is like adult stuff, and the kids are 17 and 18, and it's AP English, and letting parents know, like, if you have questions about this is new things. I don't think that's a bad thing, right? I think if, I remember reading. Like even like Night growing up was really intense, right? Certain books I read like by Eli, I can't remember his name. But about there's stuff you read and that sticks with you, and I think it's really important to read when you're young and discuss.
Yeah, that is one of the points. They identify great, impactful works of literature, and a lot of those things are going to end up treading upon some tough water.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I think this is the point. Like, talking about this is something that impacts every parent, right? In their district, for good or bad, right? And talking about Trump bad does not.
All right, we're going to talk about modernity, environmentalism, and Tushy. Oh, it's true. A lot of other countries have figured out that it's easier on everyone if you use some water instead of toilet paper. And that's what Tushy does. It's a modern bidet. It just gets affixed to your toilet. I know, it's a little bit funny, but it's also a lot awesome. It's one reason why I'm very happy to talk Tushy on the pod. Tushy's practical. It can reduce your toilet paper use by 80%. It saves you money over time. It's good for the planet. If this sounds good to you, start washing with Tushy. Go to hellotushy.com/yang to get 10% off plus free shipping. Again, that's hellotushy.com/yang for 10% off. And after you buy and install it, you can show it off. You can tag it on Hello Tushy on Instagram, and then they will be very happy with you. But it's good for you, good for the planet, good for everyone. Yeah, so here are the two main issues that Democrats have been using for the last, let's call it, 2 years. Trump bad and COVID. And apparently now the public is done with COVID, where
we're not done anymore.
Yeah, it's just not like an issue anyone wants to hear about.
Yep.
And Trump bad, in my opinion, is like a much, much weaker argument. So there's a fundamental narrative that someone walked me through that I tend to agree with. This is one of the premises of my presidential campaign, actually, was that people are getting more and more fed up, and they're casting about for some kind of answer to the fact that stuff's not working and government's not really delivering. And this has energy on the left and the right and all over the place. And so you could use this as certainly an emblem as to why Bernie was very successful, and then of course the corporate media and everyone tried to sandbag him. It's a reason why Trump was so successful, that people are fed up and then will elect a person who's just like, I'm just gonna blow it up and break things. This person made an argument that it was one reason why Obama was successful against Hillary, as like a change agent. And so people have been casting about for this alternative and being frankly fed up and disappointed, and getting,
he had no experience. I like Obama a lot,
and getting angrier and angrier all the time because like it's not delivering. And there's like this system that is built up to try and keep anything from changing, where the people are trying to change it and not being able to do so. And so now like democracy itself is kind of disintegrating, because you have these giant entrenched institutions that will try and keep things from changing. They have like a media arm that try and send certain messages. So this was a case that was made to me that I generally agree with and believe. It was one reason why I thought that, frankly, my presidential campaign would actually get some wind beneath our wings, because it's like, oh, people are fed up, people are ticked off, people want something different. Now I believe that all of the things I just described are deeply tied into the duopoly, because if you're a powerful interest, you're like, okay, I've got the Republican Party over the Democratic Party, I donate to both. Like I can keep this thing more or less under control. And so what we need is a multi-party vibrant system and different points of view. By the way, it would help address some of this polarization too, and some of the issues that you're seeing in Virginia, where people are using certain cues and being cast on different sides of these issues in very emotional ways. So do you have a prediction as to what happens in Virginia, since we're recording this before the results are out?
So we're recording this now. We may sound like idiots if McAuliffe runs away with it. But as we kind of hammer their strategy, I think Youngkin rolls. I think it's a wake-up call for the Dems. That's my call.
In my opinion, this should be a wake-up call no matter what.
It should already be a wake-up call.
Really, no matter what, that this stuff is not working. As for who pulls it out, I mean, I too close to call. I think we're going to be waiting for a minute. I think that whoever loses is going to contest it, and then we'll have a little bit of a waiting game.
That actually will be interesting to see if it's close. Because one of the things Youngkin has been navigating, the far right and that sort of thing, but trying to navigate whether or not he believes Biden actually won the election, and has kind of refused to answer that question and kind of skirted, and it's uncomfortable for him because he knows a lot of the base doesn't believe it, right?
But the big mega trend that overlays all this, in my opinion, is that the pessimism and apathy are going to go up. Like the Democrats' ability to make their affirmative case about, hey, this matters, we're going to deliver for you, vote us in, is getting weaker. And that's just a sign of where we are. It's also a sign of the polarization and the rhetoric, where if you get everyone super ginned up, say like, hey, the fate of the world is on this election, and then you win, and then you're like, wait, no, the fate of the world is on this other election. The fate of the world is on this election. And then then everyone's like, oh, like that's just an increasingly hard case to make.
I think a lot of the stuff comes down to it's compelling candidates with compelling reasons to run, I think. And Youngkin has a compelling reason to run right now. He's like for the family piece of things. It doesn't seem like Terry does. I think India Walton in Buffalo is a really good example. People are like, how could she win? She's a socialist or XYZ. This is a candidate that she won the primary, and now the Democrats are trying to,
at least some subset of the Democrats have like written in
in the incumbent
guy she beat in the primary.
But the reality was, she was a compelling candidate with a strong reason to run. Like she, got a whole bunch of people in the primary to vote for her and believe in her. Period. The end. Like that's what happened. So,
and there is something very, very important about this, which is that Democrats sometimes don't seem very lowercase d democratic. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, you lose in the primary. You're like, well, I lost fair and square. It's like, no, like this election, not right. Or it's like, what, people choosing Bernie? No. Like that's not right. They don't know what they're doing.
They know what they're talking. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. No, there is like a real anti-populist sentiment within the Democratic Party. Some people call it the corporate Democrats, where it's like, we know best. We're kind of paternalistic. No, you voted for that person. That's not what you're supposed to do.
That's not what you meant.
That's not what you meant. Yeah. And so this is something that the Republican Party does seem to have over the Democratic Party, which is the Republican Party is like sorted out. What's that? You elected this person that, is a little bit out there. All right, I guess we're riding with that.
Will the people.
Yeah, whereas the Democrats are like, no. Like, like we can't allow that. And I think that's one reason why, again, we need to change this dynamic, because you're going to have a Democratic Party that's kind of at war with itself as a result, because there's like this layer of people being like, this is what's appropriate and this is what's not appropriate. And then people getting more and more pissed off and fervent on one side of it. And the Republican Party, for better or for worse, has essentially gotten swallowed up by by like the, like the fervent opposition. And the Democratic Party is trying to present itself as like the mature adults in the room and the professionals and the rest of it. And you could make that argument in some cases that is what they represent. But one of the byproducts of that degree of maturity or experience is also a sense of incrementalism around the big issues, maybe in part because there are a lot of very, very big corporate interests who already have their hooks in you and are like, hey, go slow. And you're like, yeah, right. Go slow. I mean, the biggest thing in DC right now that exemplifies this is the fact they couldn't get this freaking lower prescription drug provision into the mega bill because, the pharma lobby's there. And so, it's one of the causes of frustration. I just want to point out the Democratic Party, it really doesn't seem to like lowercase d democracy as much as you would hope. And one big push for us, in my view, is trying to transition to a more lowercase d democracy by having more parties, because you're in a lot of environments where the Democratic Party is the only show in town.
Let me ask you this. I just went and saw To Kill a Mockingbird, the play. So Aaron Sorkin wrote the play, and Jeff Daniels is in it, and he's Atticus Finch, and it's awesome. If you're in New York, it was like not that expensive. It was dynamite. So I don't know if this is in the book or not. It's been a while since I read the book, but one of my favorite quote from the play, at least, and maybe it's in the book, it said, Atticus Finch says, a person is smart, but people are dumb. And he was talking about basically the wisdom of the mob and that mob mentality. And that may kind of tie into what you're talking about, lowercase d democracy and sort of this like paternalistic aspect of our parties. Like, thoughts on how you navigate that? Because I do think the mob can just be completely irrational. In China, they're like, yeah, the crowd is dumb. We're going to have the 10 of us or whatever the number, we're just going to decide for you and how things work, and you have no say. Thoughts on how you actually balance that? And is it ranked choice voting where you actually have more options and that a little more dynamic, or what? How do we solve for this?
It's tough because I think people at this point are very fed up, and some people want very, very significant changes, but our institutions aren't really designed to deliver those changes. That's like a reasonable summary of where we are.
Yeah.
So in my view, the challenge is to make our institutions capable of delivering what people want to a much higher degree than is currently the case. That's a big, big challenge. Some people who've been looked at it being like, oh, that's next to impossible. But I think our two choices are for people to essentially just like trash and tear down these institutions
and blow them up,
blow them up, or make them deliver, get with the program. That's pretty much the choice. And so you have two very difficult choices. It's like neither of them is easy, but you'd rather pursue the second. We all get down in the dumps sometime. No time more so than now. I mean, the honest truth is that a lot of people are struggling right now. You'd be kind of weird if you weren't struggling, but you have to do something about it. You have to take action. And one of the absolute best ways to take action is actually to talk to someone. Now, you have friends, yes, you have family members, yes, but they are not really cut out to be your sounding board for a lot of this stuff. But you know who is? A licensed therapist through BetterHelp. I think of this as Uber for mental health. And if you do this, you're going to be so glad because it's a professional therapist who's on call for you. Whenever you need them, you can ping them day or night. You can start communicating with someone in under 48 hours. So if this sounds like it would be good for you, and it really would be good for just about all of us, I kid you not, go to BetterHelp.com. As a listener to this podcast, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor at BetterHelp.com/Yang. Over 1 million people have taken charge of their mental health. You should too. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Yang. I am pumped to promote BetterHelp because it will actually help just about every single person.
I will say this: if you're the Dems and you value this race as a party, you gotta get some damn bills passed before election day. You've had your time. You know what I'm saying? Like if they passed a bill, I think McAuliffe can probably
at least talk about it. Sure.
Yeah. And so Terry is, in my opinion, like the emblem of the Democratic Party.
He's up there.
He's like it in many ways, at least from a state level, right?
He's up there. He's a very, very big deal.
So if he loses, it's I don't know what to call it.
It's a very, very powerful
referendum,
sign of what's
I guess,
to come.
Referendum of or a reality check for the Democrat Party.
Yes, and yes. And again, even if he ekes it out, I don't think Democrats should take from that like, oh, it's working.
We did it.
It's working. Yeah.
What did you say? Hanging on by a thread is not a strategy.
Yes, hanging on by a thread is not a strategy. And again, this is a state that Biden won by 10 points. I mean, this is not a Trump-loving state.
What's a better strategy? Hope and change or hang on by a thread?
I prefer hope and change. Those are my only choices.
I just remember, what was it? Was it hope is not a strategy? Was that...
I think that's a business saying. Hope is not a strategy.
That was what the Republicans said to mess with Obama. I'm just trying to remember when it was. Anyway, not the point. Moving on. Other than this in politics, there's a bunch of random things going on in the world that I think it'd be good to get your thoughts. First of all, you were back in Iowa, man. How was that?
Thank you, Team Iowa. Thank you, Yang Gang. It was glorious, man. Just a trip down memory lane where I got to see the site of Yangapalooza, where I rocked out with Weezer and hundreds of Yang Gang from around the country.
Mm-hmm.
I saw staffers from the campaign who were, in other parts of the Midwest who just came back for this event. So it was a bit of a reunion. It was wonderful. It made me really glad that I went to Des Moines, had a great night, great event, great driving around, campaign for local candidate.
Pizza Ranch,
yes. So thank you to everyone who fueled the campaign. It was fun being back at the site of so many of our high watermarks, including the Wells Fargo Arena. I didn't go inside the arena, but I remembered walking from the ice rink to the arena. Beto dropped out a couple 100 feet away.
That's true.
And then we went in and, the Yang Gang was out in force in the rafters. I delivered one of the more memorable speeches of the campaign. So being back was fun, and it made me appreciate how much we accomplished.
I haven't stomached being able to go back. My worst Iowa memory was when it was negative 30 degrees.
The advice from public health officials was don't breathe outside.
Don't breathe or your lungs will freeze up and bleed.
Yeah, I was breathing through a scarf. It was minus 30.
Negative 30, guys.
There's something called a bomb cyclone, I think.
Yep. It was and there's an actual weather turn. No thanks. Love you, Iowa, but I don't know if I can do it.
I was in Iowa that day trying to campaign, and even Iowans were like, fuck this, I'm not.
Yeah, well, Carly was saying she lives in college town, and there were girls going out in it wasn't negative 30, but let's call it negative 5, 0, whatever it is. And they're wearing little skirts to go to the bar. And she's like, no anyone, no guy, no bar, no party is worth what you're doing to your body right now. No thanks. But anyway, good to be back. A couple other things that are interesting. And they're all adjacent or right on topics we've talked about before. But this one was funny. It was a Twitter, I don't want to say spat, Twitter conversation between Elon Musk and the head of one of the senior leads of the UN, I think the Children's Fund, basically saying that there's a conversation around taxing the billionaires to solve more social problems. Elon Musk gets a ton of pressure or flack for not giving enough to charity, which I don't know.
Well, there was a CNN piece that said if billionaires gave certain amount of money, I think it's $6 billion, it would cure world hunger.
$6 billion would cure world hunger. And Elon Musk clapped back.
Elon was like, hey, if someone can demonstrate to me that this is true, I will donate the $6 billion and sell Tesla stock to do so. Yeah. And then a leader of the World Food Program said, look, the headline is not accurate. You cannot cure world hunger with $6 billion, but you can feed the most food insecure 42 million.
Yeah, it would solve geopolitical instability, in his words. His name is David Beasley, who is his WFP chief, which is the UN World Food Program situation. Anyway, that's his job.
And Elon suggested, look, if you can demonstrate to me where all the money goes, I'll do it. So this made some news, some headlines.
It didn't get CNN was a piece. There was some thing, but to me it was... I think was missed where there's a ton of headlines on billionaires not giving enough XYZ, but then literally one finally says, okay, yeah, I'll give the money if you show me that it would work. And the answer is, oh no, it wouldn't work. And that's what's you put out some of the fire, but it would just go right back up to starting again.
Well, the headline was just a little bit sensationalistic, which, it's like cure world hunger for X amount of money. And we all instinctively are like, so can you really cure world hunger for that much money? You might be able to feed people for a particular period.
Yeah.
I suggested that Elon give the money to give directly and then have all the money flow through to various people in the developing world. I thought that would be a really nice win. I think Elon's actually kind of warmed to that sort of thing because Elon's not an institution truster. And so if it was like, hey, look, all your money is going to go directly to a person, I think he'd prefer it. I will say, having met with Elon, I'm highly confident that he does not have a giant philanthropic organization around him the way that most billionaires at that scale do, where they'd have people and they handle it. I don't think Elon has that.
I think I talked to his COO when we were on the trail. I think he has a donor advised fund and a couple infrastructure, which is where you can give Tesla stock, you can give securities, and you get the tax deduction. The money's gone, but then you just can give the charity at your convenience and have it there, and it can grow tax free. It's an interesting vehicle. But here, I want I have to point this out. So Dave Beasley, this guy I was talking about, the head of the World Food Program, the UN, said this is the public spat. Thousands and thousands of people are retweeting and liking this. Elon, with your help, we can bring hope, build stability, and change the future. And my skin crawled when I read that, because that is the crap that you get from the charity work. I'm gonna call them the charity experts, if you will, the nonprofit operatives who are doing great work, and they mean well, and they're nice and lovely, and they're saints many times. But what does that mean? We're going to bring hope, build stability. I guess that one is a little more tactical, and change the future. It's like so vague. It's just tug on your heartstrings type operating. But in practicality, the way you'd actually fix world hunger, I think you'd have to bribe a whole bunch of people, right? Like you've got food, individuals being deprived food in various countries that are being controlled by people who have the resources, right?
Yeah, and that is one of the concerns is you go and you try and help, and then the corrupt leaders end up just stocking all the food, and doing things that don't help the people.
No.
You hope the UN has a direct pipe to a lot of these folks, but I think we all sense that isn't always the case, where the leadership of a country can sometimes intercede in a way that's not good. So that my hope really was that Elon proceeded and gave the money to some good cause.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that does really hit home for you is that at this point he's publicly supposed to be worth $300 billion or so. For him to donate $6 billion is 2% of his net worth,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually very doable. And you're like, oh, he actually could do this.
Right.
So I hope that he ends up doing something super positive at that scale. And I wanted to recommend different approaches if he decided that the United Nations numbers weren't buttoned up enough or satisfactory.
I mean, this is the existential challenge, is actually solving some of these problems. It's hard. It's complicated.
But one of the interesting things about this too is like a lot of people respect Elon and admire him because he's trying to do something species altering, and having met him, he genuinely just wants to do something species altering. He's like, look, you hit the fast forward button long enough, we screw up this planet, we got to get to the next planet for the preservation of the species.
Yep.
So that's what I'm about. And I think a lot of people love that about him, and also sense that if we left it up to our current institutions to accomplish the same task, they'd probably be way, way, way back on square one, whereas Elon's already on square 18 or whatever. So that's in some ways the conversation that's being had is you have this institution, the United Nations World Food Program, that's like, look, we need money to do X, Y, and Z, and then someone like Elon's like, okay, like if we were to do it, like how do we do it? Someone I think in the same article said like, look, you got more than $6 billion in the last period, and there's still world hunger.
Yep.
So there's like this institutional mistrust that built up. And so Elon, it's like you kind of know what you're going to get with him. And so a lot of people are like, okay, like this is just a human doing human things.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, we could use more humanity in a lot of areas. This is one of the big themes of the last number of years for me. It's like humans versus institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of places, in American life where they're trying to say, no, can't trust humans. Here's like the institutional layer that's going to safeguard us.
Here's the org that will help us.
Or here's like the pipes or like the rest of it. And then some of us now are like subject to these institutions being like, wait a minute, I don't really love this institution. I don't think it cares about me. It doesn't seem to give a shit about me.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no, settle down. You don't know as well as we do. And then more and more of us are like I would really love an alternative. and then someone like Elon's walking around being like, I'm like a walking, breathing alternative.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like my own freaking force of nature, the rest of it. And some people are like, yay, like I'm a person. Yeah, and then some people are like, boo, it's person. Yeah.
It just drives me nuts that, and maybe I don't know, maybe this is like my profession. Like, it's tough for me to boo a guy like Elon.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Where he's like, hey, the world's melting, so I'm going to build a car company better than anybody else, and I'm going to leave all the IP open for everyone. And look at it now. Electric cars are a thing. Like, there's advertising for them. Like, we don't need gas anymore. And it's not just him. It's everyone.
He's literally advanced the species already. So, and he's continuing to do so. So, like, being mad at that strikes me as really kind of bizarre.
And expecting someone to be perfect either. Like,
also bizarre.
Someone on the line,
it's like, if you have the capacity to advance the species, you probably have some, different aptitudes than other people and maybe some gaps. But we should take that as part of the package and still be very, very glad that he's doing his thing.
We should be grateful. that's the last thing I want to talk about. It was something we were in San Francisco a week ago, I guess, at this point. So we have a lot of people probably listen to this podcast who live in San Francisco. So this is what I want to say, and I'm curious your thoughts. So I've been told like, oh, San Francisco is like kind of on, it's the homeless problem in San Francisco is getting out of hand. It's kind of unlivable in certain parts. And you hear that and you're like, ah, it's overblown, or they're exaggerating, or you're just like a pansy, like you deal with it, like homelessness is a thing everywhere. And then we went there, we drove through downtown San Francisco, and both of you and I who have been to been all over this country. And we've seen poverty, we've seen homelessness at every level, Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, like all over it. Our jaws were dropped, both of us. It wasn't speechless because we were like slurring words trying to describe what we were watching, but we were in shock how bad it was. Thoughts on that? What the hell happened in San Francisco? I don't know, but just wanted to bring that up.
This is something I think is very important for American society generally. So there's an attitude right now where conservatives are just telling horror stories around crime in their media. Right. You can see it in Fox, New York Post, just being like, oh, these horrific shootings, this incident, that incident. By the way, those things generally true. They did happen.
Yeah.
And then in other left-leaning media, it's like they don't talk about the crime in the same way. Mm-hmm. There's like an omission of it, in part, I think, because it doesn't run along with like particular narrative that all failures are systemic and not individual, and that those issues don't agree with a particular narrative that they'd like to present. I'm going to tell a story about my being in San Francisco several weeks ago, mm-hmm. which is not long ago. So I went into a Walgreens looking for some toiletries and maybe, and it's at ice cream sandwiches. I love those things. They sell them at Walgreens. So I go into the Walgreens, and then I hear and feel like these heavy steps with someone running towards me, which you've all felt that, running out of an aisle towards me. So I just stop so I don't collide with this person. And it's a person who's robbing the place, runs out with a bag full of goods. And there are a couple of employees around, and they just kind of look at the person, don't really do anything, kind of half-heartedly. And the person just runs out of there with a bag full of stuff. And I was like, oh, he just robbed this Walgreens mm-hmm. in front of me. And then someone looked at me and literally just said, San Francisco. And then I later found out that the authorities of San Francisco have said that they will not prosecute any crime where someone's stealing less than $1,000. And so thieves know this, so they just rob $800 or $900 worth of stuff and just run right out. Now, this happened to me in my first trip into a Walgreens. Then the following week, Walgreens announces that they're closing that Walgreens and 4 other Walgreens because they're just getting looted all the time, which I'm sure the employees on one level were shocked by because they lost their jobs. All the people in those neighborhoods that used to, by the way, rely upon those Walgreens for their daily needs or whatever, very, very sad. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that stuff gets reported. I do know yesterday I saw a friend from San Francisco who left San Francisco, and he just said, look, it just wasn't worth it. And so that stuff I'm not sure gets reported. But there's a real phenomenon going on in San Francisco that anyone who spends time there is conscious of. And with a conservative media, look at it and use it as a punching bag, saying, look at this blue city, one-party town. They can't control crime. They have homelessness problems. Like, look at these failures. And then Democrats look at it and say, like, oh, look at these, conservative media outlets just with their talking points. Like,
no empathy. What about the systematic failures that failed the person that stole from the Walgreens? Down the list.
Yeah, or some version of that, I'm sure.
The number
but what's happening in real life is just people are voting with their feet. Like my friend who left San Francisco was like, and not worth it. Yeah. I now depart. And so you have people who have that mobility, which is not everyone. A lot of people can't leave. So the folks with the most resources flee, and then the people who are left behind look around being like, what the heck's going on with this place? And there's no real accountability to the public officials or authorities there. It's just their tax base flees, and they're like, well, what are you going to do? Like, I mean, like the harder problem would have been, I'm going to suggest, like trying to stop the robbing of the Walgreens, not, by the way, make a public pronouncement that you're not going to prosecute anything less than $1,000. Now that would have been harder, but probably vastly superior as an approach to the current, essentially, like we're not going to prosecute what they consider minor crimes. And that's the kind of issue that's happening in part because our media has gotten so politicized that they can argue about the truth to that extent. And you do look at the conservative media and you're like, fear mongering. It's a little bit like, over the top. But then you look at the Democratic media and you're like, why are they not talking about this? Like, this is actually a thing. And there has to be some kind of middle ground or reality.
This sort of thing makes me so mad. So Walgreens, one example, like, look, Walgreens has enough money they can pull out. It sucks, but it's a rounding error.
I mean, again, I feel bad for both the employees and the residents. But
yes,
continue.
I agree with that. But if you're a local, you put your blood, sweat, and tears into starting a camera business, right? And you sell electronics and camera gear, and someone could walk into your store, steal $1,000, run right out, and the cops are going to do nothing and no prosecution because it was less than $1,000. That should be infuriating for everybody.
I agree.
And I think this is one of my problems as like a, I guess, former Democrat, if I'm now an independent with you, but
Nice.
I don't know where I am, man. Politically homeless, probably.
Forward is going to continue.
Someone who's like, I've always struggled with the left on figuring out where the line is. You know what I'm saying? Where, like, in terms of what's right and wrong or what the party fundamentally stands for, and then like, no, we're not going to compromise any further than that. And the right has their line. The line is Nazis, right? Like the Nazism is like, okay, that's bad. And like along the line, it's either good, but it's a little more gray. But that's like, they have the line. Like, we've gone too far. On the left, I don't know what the line is. I believe the line should be robbing and calling that okay, right? And looting stores and being okay with it. But it's a little more challenging. But having no line to me is unacceptable, right? Because I do think that leads to a version of communism where we're trying to get to equal outcomes for everyone, and there's no incentive to work anymore, because if you start a store, people can just steal from you. And I don't know, like that. I don't know. I don't know enough about what the line is, and that's why I kind of like fumble down the stretch here. Be curious everyone's thoughts, and yours specifically.
Well, I'm with you on caring deeply about small business owners and proprietors and whatnot, because they're typically families, often immigrants themselves, is trying to make something work. And watching those stores die or restaurants shutter really breaks my heart, because I just see like a family's dream dying. And 9 times out of 10, they put tons of blood, sweat, and tears into making it work over years. And one of the things that I complained about when I was a Democrat, which I'm not anymore, was that small business owners could not stand a lot of what the Democratic Party stood for, because they would just think that the Democratic Party is always just bashing business of any kind. And,
right.
and like, I love small businesses, I think. And then some politicians would always be like, small business is the backbone of,
right.
like our society or whatnot. But then when push comes to shove, then they like, what do they do for those businesses? Not as much as I think that should have been done. So for me, obviously, like putting a rubber stamp on people stealing above a certain or below a certain amount is completely the wrong approach, because it sends an awful signal, and people heard that signal loud and clear.
Yeah, is the reason there's no accountability there because it is a one-party city, one-party state, where the sense that like your leadership is just going to fall to the party ideology, and if that isn't be tough on crime in the city, then we're not going to be able to fix it.
Well, so here's my experience talking to police officers. I've talked to a fair amount of them.
You have?
Yeah. So police officers will do their jobs as they're directed. So if a police department gets an order saying like, hey, let shit go, they'll let shit go. And then if they get an order saying, hey, like, we have to be vigilant about X, Y, Z, and now we're going to enforce that, they'll be like, all right. Like, if you give me the resources and backing to do that,
I'll do it. Yeah.
I'll do that. And they will sometimes say, it's like, for me to be able to deliver on that, I'm going to need some support. I'm going to need this, I'm going to need that. And maybe like, some kind of confidence, really, some kind of provision that like we're in it together, and that if something, for example, goes wrong, it's not that people are going to lose their careers and the rest of it.
Right.
So in many ways, it's much easier for a leader to adopt the let shit go tack, and then the cops will be like, oh, right, like, leader wants to let shit go, then like,
what am I going to do?
Yeah, well, what am I going to do? because the okay, let's get in the weeds and try and solve for this stuff ends up giving rise to like a bunch of issues that are going to be difficult and fraught and maybe politically, emotional, and the rest of it. And so the path of least resistance really leads to something like San Francisco, in my opinion.
That's terrifying. Like that, because we see that across the country in various cities.
Well, most police departments would never do what
San Francisco's doing.
Yeah,
I mean,
or certainly I don't think any mayor would come out like, even if there was like a policy, they would never ever breathe a word about it.
Right. Yeah.
Because a lot of the deterrent is around people just believing that stuff is going to.
You're correct. Right.
Yeah.
They believe in authority and rules and rule of law. Right. I don't know. Yeah. A lot of times we do. When we do talk about problems on this podcast, or I talk about problems with you, we end up coming down to a number of solutions that would just help tremendously. And they usually include these two. It's universal basic income and ranked choice voting, or like breaking up the duopoly. It's kind of where we're at right now. Because that probably would offer dynamism.
Well, you might have some competition.
Solution. Yes.
Because it's really one of the problems. You don't have meaningful competition. Things are getting tough. It's a tough run. It's going to be a tough time. I'm a pretty optimistic guy, but I think even if you're optimistic, you have to see some of the things that are going on and be like, like this is not great.
Okay, let's end on a positive note. What are you excited about between now and next Thursday? It could be anything.
I'm gonna have some fun. Well, a couple Saturdays from now, November 13th, I'm doing a book talk here in New York City.
That's right.
It's my first one in New York. It's going to be a blast. We'll kick off some new dates pretty soon. I want to get back out there as soon as I can because it's just been such a joy meeting people. So I'm excited about that.
I like that. Yang back on the trail. Taking this show on the road.
Yang back on the road. We will see you soon.
All right, that's our show. We'll be a little more positive next week. Love you guys.